All right, so we're starting a new chapter. This unit we're dealing with equations of linear relations. So last unit we talked about what the patterns are with slope, stuff like that. This unit we're focused a lot on taking an equation and being able to actually graph it. So we are going to focus on this equation today, which is y equals mx plus b. It's also called slope-intercept form, and you'll see why in a second. So when you have an equation written this way, y equals mx plus b, okay? Whatever number is here, whatever number is the coefficient of x, is the slope. Whatever number is here at the end, either being added or subtracted that is separate from the x, is the y-intercept. So let's do an example. Y equals 2x plus 3. That means this number right here is the slope. So the slope of this line is 2. And this number right here, 3, means our y-intercept is going to be 3. So if I had to graph it, I would start from the y-intercept. That's where you always start from. So in this case, it's 3. So on my graph, I'm going to put the y-intercept right there. And then I would use the slope, which is rise over run, which we talked about last unit, to draw the next point. So I go from here, I'm saying, okay, it goes up 2 and across 1 point. Up 2 across 1 point. And then I get my ruler, and you draw a line, arrowheads, and we're done. That's our graph for this equation. Let's look at a couple more that are a little different. Y equals negative 3 over 4x plus 6. Okay, same idea. This gives us the slope. This gives us the y-intercept. So if we were going to graph it, I could start from the 6. Then my slope is negative 3 over 4, which means this is the rise, this is the run. So I go down 3, and then across 4, and I put a point, and then I can draw a line extending, and that's it. So let's try and understand what's going on here. Basically, and when we write our equation, we're saying the y value, which is like the output, if we're thinking of functions, okay? If it's f at x, whatever it is. The output that we are trying to find is based on the input, but we have to do something to it and add something to it. So let's come up with like a basic example that we can deal with, okay? I have apples, and let's say I'm going to pick them. So what we need to know whenever we're doing some kind of question like this is the rate, the speed, how fast we're doing it, whatever. So the rate is the same as the slope. So it's how much you get per something. So for example, if I go apple picking, maybe I can pick like, I don't know, 20 apples per hour, okay? But in some questions, you start with a certain amount. So even though you haven't started picking, let's say when I picked up a basket to start picking, it already had a bunch of apples in it. Let's say it had like 6 apples already. So when we write our equation, we want to say total apples is equal to the number of hours times the rate plus the starting amount. So really, total apples is y, hours is x, okay, which makes sense because we would have time and we would have apples. We need to multiply the x by the rate, which we said was the slope. Our slope is going to be 20 because we said 20 apples every hour. And then we need to know what the starting value is, 6, because the idea is just say we started with 0 hours. Okay, 20 times 0 is nothing. So we would just have 6 apples to start. So we need to include that plus 6 or minus 6 or whatever it happens to be. This is our equation, which means if we graphed it, let's do 10, 20, 30, whatever, something like this, okay? 1, 2, 3. So our initial value is going to be 6, and then our next one's going to be 20 more than that. So it's going to be like up here. We need to draw a line so we can see what's happening, because that way, if we look on our graph, if we want to make a prediction, after 3 hours, how many will we have? After 2 hours, how many will we have, etc. The reason the line extends is because the x values keep going and the y values keep going. We do need to do domain and range sometimes, so in this situation, you can't have negative x values, you can't have negative y values, that kind of thing. So the basic thing to take away, when you're given an equation, that number is the slope, that number is the y-intercept. If it's not in that form, you just have to rearrange the equation so it's y equals, and then whatever number is in front of the x is the slope, whatever number is at the end is the y-intercept. And the last weird example is, in this, what's the y-intercept? The number right there. 0. It's plus 0. What would the slope be? What number is right there? It's 1. Okay, because there's a coefficient of 1 on every variable if you can't see it. So we will talk about a couple weird situations that don't work with this, but that's the basics of what we need to know for this section.